Hi, welcome to Money9. I'm Karthik Malhotra. If you started losing hair like me, well, chances are old age is not as far as you thought it would be. Well, don't get me wrong, this show has nothing to do with hair growth tonics, but a tonic of a different kind called retirement planning. And guess what? Vishal Dhawan, founder and CEO Plan Ahead Advisors, is with us today to tell us the exact recipe and the exact ingredients that go into this heady mix called retirement planning. Vishal Dhawan, thank you so much for being here with us. Help us with your cocktail recipe. But before that, what is the math? Help us crunch the numbers. There's no end to wants. But how do I plan for my basic needs post-retirement?
Thanks for having me on the show. I think it's so important that one distinguishes between needs and wants. That it needs a lot of attention, and I think the best way to do that for a lot of people is to separate out what are discretionary expenses, typically things like travel, gifting, entertainment. These are all discretionary expenses, and then you have what we call fixed expenses. So these are typically food, clothing, your rents, etc. Those are all things that you can't really compromise on. I think one of the best ways to decide what you can afford to do is first of all to try to estimate what you require. So what you do is you start off with saying, okay, so let's say I'm a couple, we are 35 years old, we want to retire at 60, which means we've got 25 years to go to retirement. We're going to live and have life expectancy till 80, which means we need to plan for 20 years. How much do I really require? So the best way to do that is to say, okay, let's assume that our expenses, fixed plus discretionary put together, is going to be about 50,000 rupees a month. If inflation is going to be at 6% a year and I'm going to be able to invest in a manner where I get returns which are similar to inflation, then I need a corpus of 1.2 crores when I retire. And therefore, if I'm able to get that 1.2 crores just for retirement, then I'm okay. Maybe I can have a little more discretionary expenses. I can have some more wants taken care of because, I can afford to do that. But if I find that I'm not going to have that 1.2 crores, then I think there's a problem on hand and you need to really, really focus on just your needs and not get into the fancier wants.
Right, Vishal. So help me understand again, while one may have a very, very different corpus in mind depending on one's lifestyle and of course the needs that one may require, but is the Provident Fund, the EP especially, enough for retirement planning?
Very unlikely, because what the Provident Fund does is, it is typically paid on basic salary. And what you end up finding in most compensation structures today is that basics are quite a small component of your overall compensation. Typically, we find that it's between 30 to 50% of your overall compensation. And then a percentage of that is used for Provident Fund. So I think, just planning with your Provident Fund is not going to be enough. In fact, a lot of younger people today actually try to opt out of Provident Fund and get the cash in hand, which we think is a terrible idea because the way that we look at it is at least you're saving some component of your money for retirement. If you have a Provident Fund, if you didn't have one, it's very likely that you aren't saving at all for retirement.
Provident Fund, can I not invest an additional part of my salary into VPF, which at some level is retirement planning and will help me, with better interest rates than many other products which are safer as compared to other market-driven investments?
So the voluntary Provident Fund is actually a very attractive option. But you need to keep in mind that if you're investing for retirement long term, the challenge with most fixed income options, including VPF, is that they are unlikely to beat inflation materially. And therefore, what you want to do is have some assets that beat inflation. For example, equities bought through index mutual funds or through diversified multi-cap funds or flexi-cap funds. Those are the kind of instruments that typically will help you beat inflation. So you need to combine your retirement portfolio in a manner where you have some contributions happening to your Provident Fund and some components being saved into other assets which can beat inflation over a period of time.
So is National Pension Scheme something that you advise your clients to consider at all?
We certainly think it's a good idea because of two reasons. One is it's a very low cost instrument. And what you find is when you're investing over long periods of time, expenses can make a big difference in terms of your overall return. The second is, unlike the provident fund, where typically you'll find that the equity exposure is very small because the current provident fund rules do not allow more than 15% of your incremental money to be invested in equities. In the case of NPS, you can actually create a portfolio which has much more equity exposure. And we all know that over long periods of time, equity as an asset class can actually do quite well and beat inflation materially, even though it's very volatile in the short term. So we think the NPS is a good option. It ensures that you save a portion of your money dedicatedly for retirement, and you don't end up, pulling that money out just because you had a short-term need, which kind of came up all of a sudden.
So is there a magic tonic like I was alluding to just as we were starting this show? Is there a magic sort of proportion pie chart that this much component should go into EPF, a little bit into NPS, some equity, other asset classes perhaps like gold, real estate? Is there a formula to that?
Well, I think the only magic portion there is starting early. I think that's the biggest magic portion that people need to take advantage of. I think most people put off their retirement planning till too late. They tend to start retirement planning after they've got their house under their belt, after they've got education taken care of, after their children, and they're not giving themselves enough time for their retirement corpus to grow. So I think that's number one. Specifically around the mix of assets, we think a lot of this is driven around the age group that you're in. And you could find that when you start off, you could actually be putting anywhere between 70 to 80% of your money towards equity, and the rest of it in areas like provident fund. But as your time passes, maybe as you get closer to retirement, you want to reduce the amount of equity just because of the risk associated with it. So I would say look at reducing this as time passes to equity, but take advantage of equities when you're young.
So how early is too early to start retirement planning and how late is too late?
We typically tell people start planning for retirement from your first salary.
Is that practical? Do people do that?
So we find that people are gradually getting exposed to this, especially if they've been through a system where they found that their parents actually did not have enough money for retirement. Otherwise, we actually find that most people wake up to retirement planning somewhere in their mid-30s. By that time, they're married, they've got maybe a small family, and I think they suddenly realize that their careers may not be as long as they'd ideally like it to be. I think the clear trend that we're seeing is, unlike what people used to have earlier, where they used to work till 60 or 58, I think a lot of people now end up working, till their late 40s or early 50s. And therefore, they need to be able to crunch their savings into a shorter period. And that savings has to last them for longer. And that creates a big challenge. So I think the sooner you start, the better off you'll be.
Right. One final question before I let you go, Vishal. What is the one don't? You've given us a lot of do's. What is the one don't, or the biggest mistake people may make while planning for their retirement? So what is that one thing you want to guard them against?
So I think the one thing that we would strongly guard against is believing that we are going to end up being able to dip into this retirement corpus whenever we want. I think the approach that we see a lot of people taking with their retirement corpus is that they look for what are the kind of eventualities where they can dip into their retirement corpus. For example, a provident fund allows you to take out money in case of education for a child, or for home renovation, or buying a home, etc. And we find many people use that as an opportunity to actually dip into their retirement savings, when they should completely avoid it. Because the problem that they end up facing is they end up being under-prepared for retirement. And unfortunately, no one is willing to give them a loan for retirement, unlike other things that you can plan for. So avoid touching a retirement corpus for anything except for retirement.
Vishal Dhawan, always a pleasure having you with us here on Money9. Thank you so much for joining us. Clear advice coming there from Vishal Dhawan that retirement corpus is only for retirement. Don't mix it up for any other expenses. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.